Yeah. I'm actually quite. I'm just taken aback about the sort of. I'm sorry, Mike. In my mind's eye, I'm seeing you pull your teeth with the pliers. Psychologically, did it? It must have been quite a lot for you to get to that stage, going, I actually can't afford to go to the dentist. I've got to do it myself. Yeah.
Well, I'm quite a pragmatic person. It was just like, got to do something about this. Can't afford it. I'm a rurally born and raised Maori guy who we're used to not having stuff, right? We don't come from privileged backgrounds and stuff, so we're just used to doing things. Any way you can.
Bill O'Connor is the president of the New Zealand Dental Association. Bill, welcome to the panel.
Hello, Wallace. How are you?
Did you hear that?
I did hear that.
So, indeed, that is the topic. People are starting to self-extract, and we've got one of them on the panel.
Claim to fame.
So, to that, how big do you think the issue is here in New Zealand, Bill?
Well, the issue is quite big. You have to. I guess when Mike did that, that's a few years back, but. There seems to be a lot more people now who are unable to afford to access dental treatment.
And why? Why is it so damn expensive?
Well, it's no more expensive than it's ever been. I mean, people always complain about the cost of dentistry, but it's no more expensive. The vast majority of people in New Zealand do manage to get to the dentist, and the system works really well for them. But there's a growing group, I guess, of people who are living on an income that just doesn't allow dentistry to be part of their life. So I guess there's more and more people on that the poverty line maybe, or
So my question is, how could the dental service be better incorporated into the general public health system so to help people? Because there is no doubt there is quite an issue, Bill. I mean, the ADHP said it's actually introduced a phone booking system to stop patients lining up for hours outside of their clinic. Yeah,
well, I don't know whether the general public health system would be able to cope with the demand that's there. I mean, they're struggling to cope now, but there needs to be targeted, subsidised funding available for people who really can't afford to have treatment, those who really, really need it. And, it may be that, they go out into the community to the dentists who are out there. I mean, there's a great workforce of dentists out there that are able to treat these people if somebody will fund it for them.
You haven't had much of a response here, Victoria. Let's bring you in. What do you make of it?
I think, on the whole, New Zealand has got disgraceful oral and dental health. I think more and more there are people that can't afford it, and it's not about being on the poverty line, it's just they simply cannot make ends meet. And I have never understood why dental care doesn't form part of our general health system. We have a system of subsidisation for people that can't afford to get health because we want to provide the safety net, and it's inconceivable to me that it doesn't apply to dental care. So I think we need to change it.
To that end, there are calls for some bold aspirations akin to smoke-free 2025, like a caries free by 2030. But we are out of time. Bill, thank you for coming on briefly. And Mike Smith, great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ross.
And Victoria Stewart, thank you as well.
A pleasure, thanks.
Wonderful. And we'll try and hit you up with the old school panel music sometime.
Oh, thank you.
Checkpoint next.
Mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, Auckland is on measles alert as 2 cases are confirmed, while Canterbury doctors struggle to get enough vaccines. Cardinal George Pell is sentenced to 6 years jail in Australia for sexually abusing 2 choir boys. More court action here as the lawyer for Afghan villagers at the centre of an inquiry says they've been left out of the process. I need to be tighter. That's the mea culpa from Ron Mark after making comments that seemed to suggest he'd cut off veterans' funding if they didn't vote New Zealand first. Insurance company IAG confirms it's rejecting more applicants than it accepts in Wellington, but it says it's not about the profits, and the entire town of Kaikoura is told to boil water.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with tēnei. The insurance company IAG has admitted it's turning down more new customers in Wellington than it has in the past. The government said earlier today that IAG, which owns State, AMI and NZI, is no longer accepting new customers for contents or home insurance in the capital. The company's Executive General Manager of Consumers, Kevin Hughes, told media this afternoon that it's being more strict about granting new property insurance. But he says it's a rebalancing, not a blanket policy.
So if a customer moved homes, we would not support them going to a new home. We would stay where the risk is. Our approach changed to saying we need to support our loyal customers, so where our loyal customers go, we will follow them. As part of that, it meant that we were saying more times no to new customers, but saying yes much more to existing customers.
Kevin Hughes says IAG has been more conservative in the Wellington region since the 2016 Kaikoura earthquake. A man has been charged with the murder of a baby in Northland. 4-week-old Marie Takuira Mita Ngahere died last month after suffering head and other injuries. The 22-year-old man, who also faces a charge of assault on a child in relation to a separate matter, will appear in the Kaitaia District Court tomorrow. The government's inquiry into Operation Burnham faces a challenge in the High Court. The inquiry is being held in response to allegations made in the book Hit and Run, whose authors say 6 civilians died and 15 were injured in the army operation in Afghanistan, and events were later covered up by the military. The inquiry will be held mostly behind closed doors, and Deborah Manning, a lawyer who represents some of the Afghan villages at the centre of the claims, has today applied for a judicial review. She wants the inquiry to be completely open to the public and for the focus to be on the villages. At the moment, she says it's skewed towards the Defence Force.
The way this inquiry has been operating is it's as though the NZDF are the victims. They're the victims of allegations that have been made in the book, and that they need to be able to defend themselves and their public reputation.
Deborah Manning. However, the Attorney-General, David Parker, says he stands by the integrity of the inquiry.
No, I don't believe it is weighted in favour of the Defence Force. It's intended to get to the bottom of what happened in Afghanistan. But nonetheless, I respect the right of people who disagree with the process that's being followed by the inquiry to take judicial review proceedings if they want.
The Attorney-General, David Parker. The former Vatican Treasurer, Cardinal Pell, has been sentenced to 6 years in prison for sexually abusing 2 13-year-old choir boys at St Patrick's Cathedral in Melbourne in the 1990s. The 77-year-old Cardinal is the highest-ranking Catholic priest anywhere in the world to be convicted of child sex offences. In the County Court of Victoria this afternoon, Pell showed no reaction when Chief Judge Peter Kidd delivered the sentence, stipulating a minimum non-parole period of 3 years and 8 months.
In my opinion, all of the offending across both episodes is made significantly more serious because of the surrounding or contextual circumstances, namely the breach of trust and abuse of power. In my view, your conduct was permeated by staggering arrogance.
Peter Kidd. A hearing on Pell's appeal against his conviction is scheduled in June. Canterbury now has 28 confirmed cases of measles and a further 20 suspected cases are being checked. The region's Medical Officer of Health, Ramon Pink, says 18,000 doses of the MMR vaccine have arrived and have been sent to family doctors today. He says 9,000 more doses will arrive later this week and extra stock next week, providing about 27,000 more doses. Dr. Pink says the first priority is children aged from 12 months to 13 years who have never been immunised. One of the country's largest travel agents says the decision to suspend operations of Boeing 737 MAX aircraft in and out of New Zealand will potentially inconvenience thousands of customers. The Civil Aviation Authority's decision affects only one operator, Fiji Airways, which in any case has grounded its 2 MAX 8s. 2 planes of that type have crashed in the past 5 months and several other countries have also suspended their operation. The House of Travel's Commercial Director Brent Thomas says Fiji Airways flies into Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, and customers have been contacting them, asking what their options are.
So they've got a couple of other planes that they are using on other services, and they are replacing the MAX with those. Should there be further scheduling issues, one of the options that Fiji Airways will have is to go and lease planes, which has happened in the past where things like the Dreamliner issues, where planes were brought into service from overseas.
Thomas of House of Travel. The outdoor clothing company Kathmandu is apologising to customers whose personal and financial information may have been stolen in a hack of its website. It says it's urgently investigating how a third party got unauthorised access to the site for a month earlier this year. Its Chief Operating Officer, Ruben Casey, says the clothing firm had all of the cybersecurity measures required by banks, but is sorry that wasn't enough.
We unreservedly apologise if customers have been impacted, and we do take their information very seriously. So, we're really disappointed that this has happened.
Ruben Casey of Kathmandu. A police siege in Taupo this afternoon has ended with the arrest of a man. The police had cordoned off an area around Tongariro Street after what they described as a family harm incident at about 3 o'clock. They say they had concerns for a man's safety and well-being, but the situation has now been resolved. It's 6 minutes past 5. The Northern Stars coach Kirk Wells is hoping tonight's ANZ Netball Premiership clash with the Northern Mystics doesn't turn into a game of push and shove. The two sides meet in the Auckland derby in Papakura tonight. The Stars have won 2 of their 3 games so far, while the Mystics are winless. Wells says last season's clashes got too physical.
As long as we stay disciplined and we don't get too niggly, the games last year started to get really niggly against the Mystics, and I think we've got to rise above that, and we're capable of beating them with skill, so we're just going to focus on that.
Kerry Wells. The Chiefs have made 6 changes to their side following their humiliating 57-28 loss to the Crusaders in the last round of Super Rugby. All Black Damien McKenzie moves from first 5 to fullback for Friday night's match against the Hurricanes in Hamilton. The Chiefs have lost all 4 of their matches so far this season. Cristiano Ronaldo scored a record equalling 8th Champions League football hat-trick as Juventus stormed back from a 2-0 first leg deficit to beat Atletico Madrid 3-0 in the return leg to reach the quarter-finals. Manchester City have qualified for the last 8 for the 3rd time in 4 seasons after a 7-0 win at home over German club Schalke sealed a 10-2 aggregate victory. That's the news.
This is unacceptable. I did not sign up for this. When I prayed during the winter months, I asked the Lord to make it warm. I did not say, Lord, please bring the devil from hell and have him sit his ass crack on earth. That's not what I asked for.
Nights with Brian Crump. After the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel mainly fine. Waikato to Manawatu, including the central high country. Periods of rain or drizzle today, mainly south of Hamilton. Showers tomorrow, some heavy with possible thunderstorms about the central high country. For Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine spells and a few showers, especially in the afternoons and evenings. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, occasional showers or drizzle, but increasing fine spells tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, a few showers today, occasional rain developing tomorrow. To Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms clearing south of the glaciers by this evening and easing elsewhere overnight. For Canterbury, a southerly change this evening brings scattered rain, morning drizzle tomorrow, then scattered rain returns in the evening. Otago and Southland, a period of rain and strong southerlies today, mainly fine tomorrow, but evening drizzle about the east coast. Chatham Islands, occasional rain or drizzle. It's 9 minutes past 5. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Wellington's biggest insurance provider says it is rejecting more applications than it accepts in the capital, but insists it does not have a blanket policy to say no to new home and contents customers. IAG, which covers more than half of the Wellington market, says it's been taking a conservative approach since the Kaikoura earthquake, but over the past couple of weeks has changed its policy to prioritise existing customers over new ones. IAG's spokesman Kevin Hughes fronted media today to explain that meant more new customers were being denied than accepted, but applications were being dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
Previously, we were focused on supporting where we had the house risk. To make sure we were supporting the house, we've changed that to support the customer. So wherever the IAG loyal customers are going or moving to, we're making sure we're providing insurance to them as a priority. We're still available for non-customers if the circumstances are appropriate.
Mr Hughes wasn't able to say how many applications were being accepted versus those that are rejected, but he says the restrictions are limited to Wellington for now.
There's parts of the greater Wellington area that this also applies to, but it's primarily a Wellington issue.
And should other parts of the country be nervous if if it is about limiting the risk, flood-prone Dunedin, coastal erosion in other parts of the country? Is this a trend that we're going to see more of?
We will definitely see more trends of us understanding the risks that apply in certain places, and we certainly know what's developing as far as climate change and coastal erosion. That will also always play a part on whether we think there's a risk there.
Kevin Hughes says IAG does still plan to grow its customer base overall in New Zealand, but only in certain areas. And we'll have more on this story after 6. The most senior Catholic figure ever to be found guilty of sexual offences against children will spend at least 3 years and 8 months in jail. Cardinal George Pell was today sentenced to 6 years in jail for sexually abusing 2 choir boys when he was Catholic Archbishop of Melbourne. The former Vatican treasurer was found guilty by a jury last December of sexually abusing the choir boys after a Sunday Mass in December 1996 and then assaulting one of them a second time 2 months later. Foreign editor Graham Acton reports.
The man who was once Australia's most powerful Catholic sat in the dock dressed in a black shirt and grey blazer without a clerical collar as County Court Chief Judge Peter Kidd delivered his sentence. Judge Kidd told Pell the power imbalance between the victims and a senior church official was stark.
Cardinal Pell, would you please stand? I sentence you to a total effective sentence of 6 years imprisonment. I set a non-parole period of 3 years and 8 months. In my opinion, all of the offending across both episodes is made significantly more serious because of the surrounding or contextual circumstances, namely the breach of trust and abuse of power. This elevates the gravity of each of the offences. In my view, your conduct was permeated by staggering arrogance.
The court heard that Pell abused the choir boys, who cannot be identified, after celebrating one of his first Sunday Masses as Archbishop at St Patrick's Cathedral in East Melbourne. He caught them drinking altar wine in the priest's sacristy, which is off limits to the choir. In sentencing, the judge said he'd taken into account Pell's advanced age, and he also told the court Pell was not being made a scapegoat for the failings of the Catholic Church, but for his own crimes.
The brazenness of your conduct is indicative of your sense of authority and power in relation to the victims. You did not seek to secure the door of the priest's sacristy before you commenced the offending. You offended against 2 victims despite the fact that the door was unlocked and despite the risk that either victim could have run from the room or later complained. I think you did give thought or reflection to this offending, and the only reasonable inference from the brazen circumstances of your offending is that you had a degree of confidence that the victims would not complain, either immediately or by running out at some later stage.
In a statement read outside the court by his lawyer Vivian Waller, Pell's surviving victim said he appreciated the court had acknowledged what had been inflicted upon him as a child. Dr Waller said it was hard for her client to take comfort in Pell's sentence because the moment had been overshadowed by the upcoming appeal against his conviction.
A jury has unanimously accepted the truth of my evidence. Pell chose not to give evidence. The jury did not hear from him. He did not allow himself to be cross-examined. I have played my part as best I can. I took the difficult step of reporting to police about a high-profile person, and I stood up to give my evidence. Being a witness in a criminal case has not been easy.
The other 13-year-old boy who was abused by Pell died in 2014 of a heroin overdose. He never spoke about the abuse. Other victims of clergy abuse outside the court made calls for a wider justice to come down upon those guilty and protected by the church.
Time for the Catholic Church to wake up to itself. That's what it's got to do now. Wake up, admit what you've done.
Small dose of justice, but there's no justice for the ones that committed suicide or died because of the injuries. So
all for the ones justice to my brother.
At least he's in jail.
Pell will serve a minimum of 3 years and 8 months in jail before he will be eligible for parole. His legal team have already confirmed he will appeal the guilty verdict. The Australian Court of Appeal will hear the case over 2 days in June. Ko Graham Acton, Tene.
2 people have been diagnosed with measles in Auckland as the number of people with the disease in Canterbury has hit 28. This comes as vaccine supplies run low and more have had to be trucked in from Auckland. Some of those are being distributed to Christchurch GPs as we speak. Our South Island reporter Logan Church has just been at a briefing with the Canterbury DHB and joins us now from a community health facility in Christchurch's CBD. Hi Logan, so it seems measles has reached Auckland now too?
Hi Lisa, yes, it's been confirmed that 2 people have measles in Auckland, an infant and in adults. Their movements over the last week or so have been released publicly. The adult who contracted the disease was at the Matakana Market on the morning of Sunday the 3rd of March and at the Life Central Church on Normanby Road in Mount Eden in the evening of Wednesday the 6th of March. The child who also contracted the measles was at the Wesley Market late Friday morning. It's important to note though, Lisa, that at this stage health officials do not believe that this outbreak in Auckland is linked to the current outbreak here in Christchurch.
I assume though, Logan, they'll be quite concerned with those movements because they're at quite crowded locations, aren't they? Busy locations.
Absolutely, yeah, there's certainly a lot of concern right now. Actually, the Northland DHB has said this afternoon that they think it's only a matter of time before measles makes its way up there. And certainly down in Christchurch, there is a lot of concern, especially around schools and parents with young children who are going through the vaccination process now. There's certainly a lot of concern in our communities.
What is the situation with the vaccine supply?
So in Christchurch, 18,000 vaccinations have been shipped down as of today. 14,000 of those are actually being distributed to local GPs here in Canterbury as we speak. Another 9,000 are supposed to arrive tomorrow. I actually spoke to the Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Ramon Pink, about this a bit earlier, and he said it's actually quite a tricky operation getting these vaccines down to Canterbury. They have to come from Auckland by road, as in they're not flown or shipped down, and they have to be kept in a very specific temperature bracket. He says he thinks it's around 0 degrees to 4 degrees, but now they're here or coming. The Canterbury DHB is hoping that they can get these out to their target group, as they're calling it, which are babies of 12 months up to people who are 13 years old. They are the people who the CDHB are targeting right now, especially if they have not had any vaccination so far. They say even one MMR vaccination could cover 95% of the population. One vaccine could be enough to stop you getting measles.
Logan, obviously they've been asked questions over the course of this, these cases emerging, where it's come from, what sort of patient zero is. Do they have any ideas yet in terms of Canterbury as to where it originated?
At this stage, the short answer, Lisa, is no. No one has any idea exactly where this outbreak started, who patient zero is. Today, there was a bit of discussion around how people travelling in and out of the city could be a vehicle, so to speak, for measles to get around. But just to give you an idea of where things are at in Christchurch, in the last hour, it's been confirmed that 28 people in total have contracted measles, up from 27 this morning. Out of those 28, 7 have had to go to hospital, 2 in ICU. We understand those 7, though, are now fine, but certainly still a very serious developing situation here in Christchurch, and now other DHBs are keeping a very, very close eye on their communities.
Thanks, Logan. Appreciate that. Logan Church joining us from Canterbury there, where he has just said 28 confirmed cases of measles in Canterbury now, and we have 2 confirmed cases in the Auckland area as well. Public Health releasing the details of those 2 people's movements in Auckland, and I'm sure we'll put that up on our website and Facebook page. It is 19 after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. Do text us 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The human rights lawyer representing Afghan villagers in the inquiry into the military's Operation Burnham has launched a legal challenge to the investigation. The government inquiry follows allegations in the book Hit and Run, whose authors say 6 civilians died and 15 were injured in the army operation in Afghanistan, and events were later covered up by the military. The inquiry's decision that it will be held mostly behind closed doors has been controversial. Amy Williams reports.
Lawyer Deborah Manning represents some of the Afghan villagers at the centre of the claims and wants the inquiry to be completely open to the public and for the focus to be on the villagers. Today she applied for a judicial review in the High Court. At the moment, she says it's skewed towards the Defence Force.
This inquiry has skewed, and the skewing is, we say that the victims of Operation Burnham are our clients, are the villagers in Kaikoura and Nayak. However, the way this inquiry has been operating is it's as though the NZDF are the victims.
Ms Manning says it feels like the Afghan villagers have been left out of the process. The judicial review asks for a right-to-life investigation for the villagers, which can be held if someone dies in circumstances that involve the state. Ms Manning says the government is obliged to ensure the villagers at the centre of the claim find out exactly what happened to their family members during 3 SAS raids in Afghanistan in 2010.
The right to life investigation should be triggered by the state. It should not be for the victims to be knocking on doors and having doors closed and knocking on new doors over and over again to try and get access to justice. This has been too long and too hard, and this should not be allowed to happen again.
In a letter, Attorney General David Parker, who announced the inquiry last April, says he does not intend to intervene in the process, which seeks to establish the facts and get to the truth. Mr Parker says he has full confidence in the inquiry's process and its members, and it has powers to get to the bottom of what happened during Operation Burnham.
I don't believe it is weighted in favour of the Defence Force. It's intended to get to the bottom of what happened in Afghanistan. But nonetheless, I respect the right of people who disagree with the process that's being followed by the inquiry to take judicial review proceedings.
Ms Manning says she does not want the legal action to delay the inquiry, but thinks it's appropriate for the High Court to exercise its supervisory jurisdiction over the process. In a statement, the Operation Burnham inquiry says it will abide by the decisions of the court, and its focus remains on getting to the truth of the matter. New Zealand Defence Force said it was not a matter for it to comment on. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Ko Amy Williams, TNA.
One of the country's largest travel agents says the decision to suspend Boeing 737 MAX aircraft in and out of New Zealand will potentially inconvenience thousands of customers. The decision affects only one operator, Fiji Airways. No other airline flies the plane to New Zealand, but it follows similar decisions by aviation authorities in the UK, Asia and Australia, who have opted to either ground or ban the planes from operating over their airspace. Pressure is now building on the regulators and carriers in the United States to follow suit. Catherine Hutton reports.
The decision to suspend the MAX 8 follows 2 catastrophic incidents involving the same aircraft within 5 months of each other. The first was near Indonesia in October last year, and the second was on Sunday, when an Ethiopian Airlines flight crashed en route from Addis Ababa to Nairobi. The House of Travel's Commercial Director Brent Thomas says Fiji Airways flies into Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. The airline has now replaced the MAX 8 with other aircraft in its fleet, but Mr Thomas warns there will be disruptions.
So So they've got a couple of other planes that they are using on other services, and they are replacing the MAX with those. Should there be further scheduling issues, one of the options that Fiji Airways will have is to go and lease planes, which has happened in the past where things like the Dreamliner issues, where planes were brought into service from overseas.
Mr Thomas says that means customers can expect changes to their schedule. He says so far customers have been contacting them asking what their options are. But he says it will not only impact flights but also people's accommodation and transfers. But he says this is a quieter time of year, so there's less disruption than if it had occurred in the school holidays. Aviation expert Peter Clark says Fiji Airlines only has 2 Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes, but they are a big part of a small fleet.
They only have 5 aircraft, but I think they've still kept one behind of the other 737s, so they'll be okay. Worldwide, Boeing is developing corrections now to the data system and the software, and they will be introducing those into the aircraft by the end of April, they are saying, and they are already testing these in test aircraft at this time.
Concern has been raised over the similar nature of the crashes, each occurring shortly after takeoff. Peter Golds, former managing director of the United States National Transportation Safety Board, urged caution, telling CNN it was possible the 2 crashes had 2 separate causes.
There were questions about the Lion Air crash that went beyond simply the aircraft. There was maintenance done on the plane the night before that could have been done inappropriately or incorrectly. The pilots on the plane on the day before had a similar problem and solved it. The pilots that were flying it in the accident sequence were not able to solve the problem. And so there are complicating factors to that accident.
Mr Thomas says it's important to wait and see what comes out of the investigation by Boeing and Ethiopian Airways into Sunday's crash, which killed 157 people.
What happens in these situations when there has been these kind of tragedies is the inspectors go in, they inspect what's happened with the plane, they get that information and they disseminate it to all customers who have those same planes so that any fix can be put into place. The first priority of all airlines is safety, so this is something that they share this knowledge around the world to make sure that these planes are safe to travel on.
In a statement, Fiji Airways says it continues to have full confidence in the airworthiness of the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft and will monitor developments closely. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
Theresa May's EU withdrawal deal has been rejected by MPs by an overwhelming majority for a second time, with just 17 days to go to Brexit. MPs voted down the Prime Minister's deal by 149. Now, that's a smaller margin than when they rejected it in January, but still a staggering loss. Mrs May says MPs will now get a vote on whether the UK should leave the EU without a deal, and if that fails, on whether Brexit should be delayed. The BBC's political editor, Laura Koonsberg, reports.
This is what a political disaster sounds like. MPs hurrying here and there, piling through Westminster's corridors, walking through a lobby to say no. For a second time, the Prime Minister has lost her deal, another chunk of authority, and maybe her way.
The ayes to the right, 242. The noes to the left, 391.
The Prime Minister only just hanging on to her voice, hanging on in office right now.
I profoundly regret the decision that this House has taken tonight. I continue to believe that by far the best outcome is that the United Kingdom leaves the European Union in an orderly fashion with a deal. And that the deal we've negotiated is the best and indeed the only deal available.
Exasperated, the Prime Minister will allow MPs to vote tomorrow as they wish to rule out leaving the EU without a formal arrangement. If they do, then on Thursday they could vote to delay departure. But tonight it's the Prime Minister asking, then what?
And this House will have to answer that question. Does it wish to revoke Article 50? Does it want to hold a second referendum? Or Does it want to leave with a deal, but not this deal? These are unenviable choices. But thanks to the decision that the House has made this evening, they are choices that must now be faced.
Labour voted against, and now, if it was down to them, they'd fight for a general election.
The Prime Minister's run down the clock, and the clock has been run out on her. Maybe it's time instead we had a general election and the people could choose who their government should be.
Forget the next few weeks. What happens in this circus tomorrow, when MPs can vote to say they won't let us leave without a deal? Perhaps it would never have been enough for Tory Eurosceptics, who all along have had the power to block Theresa May. Could this deal ever work for them?
52% of the voters voted to leave, but in the House of Commons, probably 500 out of 650 MPs supported Remain. And this disconnect is actually quite troubling for our politics, because the House of Commons is ignoring the majority of the British people.
She's not been able to hold back the forces who resist her deal. But ministers tonight say, despite the defeat, the political toll, you guessed it, Theresa May will try again.
Laura Koonsberg at Westminster. Checkpoint on RNZ National. Why New Zealand First, Ron Mark says he needs to be tighter with his words. The Hollywood actresses caught up in a massive university entrance scam in the US, and the Kahurangi National Park gets upsized by 64,000 hectares. As always, we would love your feedback, so do text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's the headlines with Susanna.
The insurance company IAG has admitted it's now turning down more new customers in Wellington. The government says IAG, which owns State, AMI and NZI, is no longer accepting new customers for contents or home insurance in the capital. The company says being more strict about granting new property insurance is a rebalancing policy. A man has been charged with the murder of a 4-week-old Marie Takuira Mita Ngahere in Northland. Marie died last month after suffering head and other injuries. The 22-year-old man will appear in the Kaikoura District Court tomorrow, facing one charge of murder. The government's inquiry into Operation Burnham faces a challenge in the High Court. The inquiry is into allegations made in the book Hit and Run, whose authors say 6 civilians died and 15 were injured in the army operation in Afghanistan, later covered up by the military. Most of the inquiry is behind closed doors, and a lawyer, Deborah Manning, who represents some of the Afghan villages at the centre of the claims, has asked for it to be completely open to the public and to focus on the villages themselves. The Canterbury District Health Board says 2 measles cases confirmed in Auckland today are not linked to an outbreak of the disease in Canterbury. 28 cases have been confirmed in Canterbury in the past 3 weeks, and another 20 suspected cases are being assessed. 27,000 doses of vaccine are being delivered in the region, with the first priority being given to unvaccinated children. A judge in Australia has sentenced Cardinal Pell to 6 years for sexually abusing 2 teenage boys in Melbourne Cathedral 22 years ago. 77-year-old Cardinal Pell, a former advisor to the Pope, is the most senior clergyman ever to be convicted of child sex offences. Chief Judge Peter Kidd told the Cardinal he had clearly abused his position of authority and trust. Pell is appealing against the conviction. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Let's go to business now with Nona Peltier. Nona, new figures for house prices. Well, are they holding their own, or what's the story?
They're actually still strong, remarkably strong in the regions. And when we talk about regions, I just want to make sure when I say Wellington, I mean the region, not the city, okay, just so you know. And Auckland, I mean the region as well. So prices have dropped in Auckland, and they are holding strong in regions and very strong in Wellington. But at the very same time, the sales volumes are down significantly, including Wellington. And that's because people are hanging on to their houses. They're not sure whether to sell now or later. There's a real wait-and-see attitude in the market, and that's partly because people thinking about selling their home are thinking, well, what's on the market for me to buy? So they've got the same problem. So they're reluctant to sell as well. And the uncertainty over the tax working group's proposals on capital gains tax is another bit that's weighing on the market. So
Lack of supply might be what is holding the prices even.
Yes, and not only that, people are having a hard time getting mortgages too. So even though interest rates are low, there's new regulations, or rather proposals for increased capital being held by banks. That's causing a bit of a pause on the banking side. So there's a lot of things going on right now that's unsettling the market.
Let's go to a topic that's close to my heart, food. Food prices, but negative. They have been rising at their fastest pace in 10 months. So what are we getting squeezed for?
Well, you'd be surprised. It's actually your fruits and veggies, which is...
Of course.
Okay, but, it's summer, so why is it... I don't know why they're so high, but anyway, fruit and veggies. And also, we have seen, though, that there's been a significant drop, and you'll love this, butter. Butter's dropped to a 19-month low. So that's quite significant. It's a 10% drop in the price of butter. We haven't seen a drop like that for a while. And, I remember just a couple of years ago, around about 19 months ago, we were talking about the high price, how much more it was going to cost.
So what is it? So it was knocking $6, wasn't it, for a pound of butter?
But it's actually moved down to $5.79. So actually $5.20. It was $5.79 in January, so that was the highest. So the price has been going up, and now boom, dropped a bit. So there you go.
Encouraging us to cook more cakes and eat fewer vegetables.
Do some more baking again. Well, forget about the vegetables. Well, no, I suppose you should be drinking. Actually, soft drinks also, but meat's cheaper. So there you go.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. What else happened on the markets today, Nona?
Well, of course, we've just had the Brexit story, and that's certainly been a feature in the market today. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, and that's affected the pence. And the New Zealand dollar is quite strong, so 68.4 US cents. That's been holding steady around there for a while. But look, knocking on the door of 97 cents Australian, that's quite high, and 52.3 pence. So the Kiwi's doing well, but it's the market's actually off its game, and we've seen some weakness. And in the Asian markets, they were mostly in the red, as well as Australia. We weren't doing too badly here. We're down just 10 points to 9,388.
Thanks for the business update, Nona. That's Nona Peltier. Veteran Affairs Minister Ron Mark says he needs to be tighter with his words after a speech he gave at a charity event may have been misinterpreted as a pitch for votes and linked to ongoing funding. In video excerpts of the speech given to a no-duff event in December, the minister says if the Defence Force family and others threw New Zealand First their party vote, they would probably be at 15 or 16%. Mr Mark says no duff got $25,000 of government funding courtesy of him. And he also said he hoped they recognised the responsibility that came with that. I spoke to Ron Mark and asked him if he'd been canvassing for votes when he was actually at the event in his capacity as a minister.
No, I wasn't. That assertion that's been made is wrong. It's incorrect. And I guess if you slice and spice...
In what way? In what way is it incorrect?
Well, it is incorrect. I wasn't campaigning for their votes.
OK, let's look at some of the words that you said. If all of the Defence Force family and everyone, Aaron and everyone else in the Defence Force threw us their party vote, we'd probably be at 15 or 16%. The other comment you made is, to be perfectly honest, when I look at the polling results of my political party, New Zealand First, then the veterans, the defence base, you guys haven't supported us at all. Is that a pitch for their votes?
Well, there are two separate statements made about 5 minutes apart and taken out of the context, Lisa. And and I do admit this, as I said in the House today. Looking back on that, I could have been tighter. I will be in future.
That's a pitch for votes, isn't it? That's a pitch for votes, Minister. You were making it clear. Hey, look, we didn't get the party percentage vote that we wanted. We could have gotten way more if you voted for us, and you haven't thrown your support behind us. No, it's a clear message, isn't it?
Well, I think if you listen to the entire 25 minutes and listen to those two quite separate statements within the context of what I was explaining, then you have a different picture to that which has been painted now.
Well, the people at the event were, they've said to us, shocked and surprised by the comments that you've made, and they sat through your speech, and that's their reaction. So what do you say to that?
That's one person who said that, and No Duff has actually put a statement up on their Facebook page today, which I'm quite humbled by, and that statement doesn't reflect that one person's statement, Lisa.
So who's Aaron, and why did you reference him?
Look, I'm not going to go into look. Aaron was one of the founding members. He's a.
So why did you call him out for not voting for you? Why did you call him out for that?
I didn't. Well, Lisa, that's a are you saying I called him out for not voting for me?
Well, you said these words. If all the Defence Force family and everybody, Aaron and everybody else in the Defence Force, threw us their party vote, we'd probably be 15 or 16%.
Yeah, so in the context of, that's a comment it's often made when people are asking for greater delivery and things that are not contained within the coalition agreement. And like I said, and I have referred to that and said, if we had more support, we could negotiate harder in coalition agreements. That's a fact. We don't have New Zealand First policy on the ground. We have a coalition agreement. And of course, if you receive more support, then you would have been able to negotiate, arguably more. But Aaron has been a tremendous force in behind No Duff. He's one of the founding members. Him and I talk a lot. Aaron was
So why did you name him in this context when you were talking about this? Because he's told us that he's only ever spoken to you about twice. So why did you call him out, or why did you mention him in this particular?
Just say it again. Aaron said to you that he's only ever spoken to me twice.
Yeah.
Seriously? Look, I'm not going to go into that, Lisa. Aaron is a great guy. He's one of the founding members of No Duff. No Duff is the organisation that I recognised, this government recognised as being worthy of funding for the frontline work they do.
That doesn't explain why you mentioned him in that context. Can you explain that to me specifically?
Because I was talking to him. Aaron introduced me. He said, "Ron, do you want to get up and say a few words?" And he and I talk a lot.
So was this quid pro quo for the funding? The perception that you were asking for votes, you mentioned the money that you had secured for No Duff. You said No Duff got that funding courtesy of me, were your words. And you also said, I'd like you to recognise that and the responsibility that comes with it.
So now you're bringing two statements together, Lisa.
What did you mean by those statements?
What did I mean by recognise the responsibility? Yeah, there is a responsibility when any non-government agency receives government funding to account for that, to make sure that they deliver on the service that they've been provided for, that they've been asked to deliver on. Recognising also that No Duff has been quite astonishingly successful. Within 2 years of being established, they have gained recognition as being the prime deliverer of frontline services to service women and men suffering from PTSD.
So are you saying that you were in no way...
I took the paper to Cabinet asking for approval to fund them for the first time ever. Contrast, as I said in my speech, if you contrast that with the RSA, who took 90 years to get government funding, No Duff has done exceptionally well. But it brings
Minister, can you see how some people, and in your view it might be the wrong impression, but can you see how some people might get the impression you're talking about the fact that you've secured the funding courtesy of them, there's responsibility involved in that, and you're making those comments in the same speech where you mention the fact that, well, if they all threw their weight behind you, you could get 15 to 16% in the party vote. Can you see how some people might think that you are attaching the funding to their support in some way? Can you see that?
No, look, what I can also... I've already said that I could...
Inconceivable that they would draw that conclusion?
No, I think slicing and dicing pieces out of a 25-minute speech in such a manner could lead people to believe that, Lisa. But actual fact, was not my intent. And here's the other thing.
Has the Prime Minister had a chat to you about this?
Yeah, I've talked to the Prime Minister and
what
I've
she
got to thank
said.
her. I've got to thank. Well, she said it all in the House today at question time.
No, what she said to you privately.
She asked me to explain, and she asked me around what occurred there. I told her that I could have been, on hindsight, looking back at it, I could have been tighter, and I will be in future. That I will learn from this. But
what
Lisa,
concerns did she raise with you about the contents of that speech?
No, you just asked me a couple of questions around the 2
What were
points
those
that
questions?
the media were making. The 2 points that the media are making is that I crossed the line in terms of mixing party with a ministerial speech or a ministerial engagement, and I accept that. And we'll be tighter in that respect. I'll turn up to such meetings with clearly a New Zealand First hat on one day or a minister's hat on another day.
So
She
you
also
accept that
acknowledged she knows that
you mixed those two things, Minister. You were, forwarding a New Zealand First agenda when you were at a reception in your capacity as a minister.
No, I think I could have been tighter.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Could have been tighter.
I could have been tighter, and I could allow a perception to be generated, which has been, championed by certain people for whatever advantage. But
because the cabinet manual. The Cabinet Manual requires you to protect the integrity and maintain public trust in the position of ministers. It goes on to say that you must be seen to uphold the highest ethical standards, exercising a professional approach and good judgment in your interactions with the public. Did you exercise good judgment here and a professional approach?
I thought I did at the time, yes.
But now?
Now I think I need to be tighter, and I need to.
I don't know what you mean by tighter, Minister. What do you mean by being tighter?
I just need to be tighter in my wording and be clear in my own mind that when I'm speaking as a minister, I speak as a minister.
Minister Ron Mark there. Now, just to clarify, Aaron Wood of No Duff says he actually had 3 conversations with the minister. One of those was at the event where Ron Mark spoke. The pair met almost 20 years ago when Aaron was a serving soldier in East Timor. Aaron Wood says he was surprised at the adversarial and almost combative approach taken by the Veteran Affairs Minister Ron Mark in that December speech. National claims that the minister has crossed a line, but as you heard, Ron Mark denies that and says that the excerpts of his speech have been taken out of context. No Duff's Aaron Wood was name-checked in the minister's speech, and Mr Wood says the whole speech was at odds with the tone of the event.
When he delivered a speech, obviously that was a bit surprising to us. That was not what we were sort of expecting. We weren't actually expecting anything, to be perfectly honest. I mean, he'd asked to make a speech through his people, and that was fine. That was a little surprising.
Surprising in what way?
We're an apolitical organisation. We've been very clear about that from day one. I mean, the minister is the third minister of veterans full veterans that we've seen in our first 2 years of existence. We're now just into our our 4th year. And again, sort of the lack of contact between us. So like I said, we've only spoken to him 4 times, and one of those times was 20 years ago in East Timor. So we've only met him once at his office in Parliament last year at his invitation. So we haven't had a lot of dialogue, and his public comments about NODA have been very positive and supportive, extremely positive and supportive. So this wasn't that. The theme and the tone surprised us. But to be perfectly honest, as I've said, publicly, I it's not what we expected from a minister of the Crown.
What kind of tone? How did you interpret the tone?
It's really hard to put my finger on it, Lisa, to be perfectly honest, because it was almost combative, almost adversarial, but there's nothing that I'm aware of to be adversarial combative about. So, like I said, we've had very little contact with him. So, we haven't been in the public eye or in the media sort of poking him or prodding him or saying he hasn't done a good job. And, so I really don't know.
What did you make of the fact he mentioned you by name? He said if the Defence Force family and everybody, Aaron and everybody else in the Defence Force threw us their party vote, would probably be at 15 or 16%. What did you think when he mentioned your name in that context?
That was surreal. I sort of wondered how I was responsible for such a huge burden of the political landscape by myself. But
what did you think he was asking you for, if anything? What was the message he was giving you at that point?
I honestly don't know. It was like I said. The whole tone and theme was surprising to begin with, and then that comment alone just had me completely bemused. I was thinking this was part of some wider point he was going to make, or some such, that it would lead into something. Like there was almost a punchline coming, but it just didn't. It just rang. It was out of sync, I thought, with what the rest of what the day was about, would have been briefed, etc. So, yeah.
Did you feel? Sorry to interrupt, Aaron, but did you feel that he was canvassing for votes, support?
I actually didn't, because I thought I didn't see how that could possibly be. It was almost like you couldn't believe your ears. It's like, no, he can't be doing that. He can't be canvassing for votes, surely, because I mean there were a number of recording devices in the room. His own people were recording the speech. And I thought, well, that can't be what he can be. He wouldn't be doing that, surely. That's not what he's doing. I mean, it was too obvious. So that's why I thought, like I said previously, I thought there was some sort of, he was building to something. I thought what he was trying to do was bind the veterans community together, make a sort of pitch for the greater good. But like I said, it just didn't, there was no punchline. It didn't follow through with it. So like I said, I was bemused. I was like, well, I didn't really see where that went. It was surreal, yeah.
Bottom line, did you feel the comments that he made were appropriate for the venue time that he made them?
I felt, if anything, he possibly lacked the context of what we were trying to do. Even though I'd sent him an official invitation as the Minister for Veterans, and I explained it and outlined in the invitation what we were doing, why we were doing it. There was a program in there. It's the same invitation that went out to everyone else, obviously with his name attached. I felt that maybe he had misjudged what the day was about, and yeah, he basically prepared he delivered a speech based on what he thought it was going to be, and it wasn't at all.
And that's Aaron Wood. He is from the charity No Duff, and that's an organisation which helps out veterans. It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're always keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. 2 Hollywood actresses have become embroiled in a university admissions scam, said to be the biggest ever prosecuted in the US. The pair are among at least 50 people charged after they allegedly paid a company to cheat their children into elite Ivy League colleges. The man behind the company, William Singer, has pleaded guilty in court. CNN's Randy Kay with the story.
Oscar-nominated actress Felicity Huffman and actress Lori Loughlin, best known for her role as Aunt Becky on Full House, among dozens charged in the cheating scam helping to get students into a string of prestigious universities.
50 people nationwide, 2 SAT or ACT exam administrators, 1 exam proctor, 1 college administrator, 9 coaches at elite schools, and 33 parents who paid enormous sums to guarantee their children's admission to certain schools.
According to prosecutors, the scheme involved 2 kinds of fraud. Parents paying a college prep organization to help their children cheat on SAT or ACT exams, and others paying to allegedly bribe college coaches to help admit the students as athletes regardless of their athletic skill. The prep organization at the center of the scandal was founded by William Singer. He has pleaded guilty to 4 charges, including money laundering and obstruction of justice.
Singer also arranged for someone to take online high school classes in place of certain students so that those students could submit higher grades as part of their overall college application packages.
Lori Loughlin and her husband, fashion designer Massimo Giannulli, have been charged with conspiracy to commit mail fraud and honest services mail fraud.
Hello, everybody. Today I am here with my sister, Bella,
for allegedly paying more than $500,000 in bribes to get both of their daughters admitted to USC, getting them on the rowing team, a sport which neither of them has ever participated in. Their daughters have not been charged. An email written by Giannulli in the complaint reads in part, quote, "I wanted to thank you again for your great work with our older daughter. She is very excited, and both Lori and I are very appreciative of your efforts and end result." The cooperating witness responds, quote, "With your younger daughter, please let me know if there is a similar need anywhere so we do not lose a spot." Loughlin then responds, quote, "Yes, USC for our younger daughter." Huffman is also charged with conspiracy to commit mail fraud, allegedly paying $15,000 to Singer's organization. In a phone conversation recorded as part of the investigation, Huffman says, "We're going to do like we did with my older daughter." Prosecutors are calling the scam Operation Varsity Blues and includes Georgetown, Stanford, UCLA, USC, University of Texas at Austin, Yale University, and several prominent Boston institutions. The complaint also lays out how Singer allegedly worked with parents to fake athletic credentials to get students onto college athletic teams.
Singer helped parents take staged photographs of their children engaged in particular sports.
Prosecutors making clear special treatment for the wealthy and elite would not stand.
CNN's Randy Kay. The West Coast's Kahurangi National Park has been expanded by 64,000 hectares, the largest addition to a national park in New Zealand history. The land expansion includes the Mohinunui River and catchment. Here's political reporter Gia Garrick.
The land, roughly the same size as Christchurch or half the size of Auckland, was once threatened by a proposal from Meridian Energy to dam the river for power. Forest and Bird fought tooth and nail against that, as the land would have been flooded. Chief Executive Kevin Haig says it would have destroyed the landscape and wiped out the native species of plants and animals that call the area home.
This really is the public's win. You know, we know that the public say nature is personally very important to them, and of course it's a hugely important part of New Zealand's national identity and economic profile on the world stage.
In 2012, after 5 years of fighting, millions of dollars spent on planning and even successful resource consents from the local council, Meridian Energy canned the proposal. Head of Environment, Hamish Cuthbert, says opposition at central government level was the main reason.
We did get granted resource consent initially at the regional council level, but ultimately the land was owned by the Crown, by the Department of Conservation, and it became clear that we wouldn't get the land access arrangements to be able to carry on with the project. So at that point, it was rational to stop.
Mr Cuthbert was meant to be at this morning's announcement, but missed his connecting flight from Invercargill. He says Meridian Energy now supports the catchment, which includes 15 kilometres of the West Coast's second largest river, being made a part of the national park.
I think it clarifies the status and the importance of that land, and I think that's a positive for everybody. And generally, it's always a good day if we're increasing national parks. That's a great sign.
The Conservation Minister, Eugenie Sage, specifically thanked Meridian Energy in her announcement this morning. She says that decision in 2012 means it remains untouched and the government could put further steps in place today to protect a national treasure.
It means that the department will now work with Ngāti Waiwai and Kaitahu on developing a new management plan, and it gives it stronger legal protection. It means it's protected from mining because it will become part of Schedule 4 of the Crown Minerals Act.
It will also mean more opportunities for tourism, Ms Sage suggests, with the Old Coach Road popular with trampers and mountain bikers. The National Party Conservation spokesperson Sarah Dowie supports the move.
My understanding is that we did kick off the process, but it is great that a special place has been further protected.
The next step is a review with DOC, iwi, the public and other interested parties about how the larger park will be managed from here. That includes tourism, infrastructure, walks, access ways and any other facilities. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
And now let's return to the story about Boeing. The American plane maker Boeing insists it has full confidence in the safety of its 737 MAX 8 aircraft, and there is no basis to ground it. New Zealand is among dozens of countries who've moved to either ground the aircraft or ban it from their airspace following this week's crash by Ethiopian Airlines. However, they are still flying in the US, and CNN's Tom Foreman has this report.
Facing serious safety questions and brutal political headwinds, the Boeing 737 MAX 8 is being grounded around the globe. In the United Kingdom, the European Union, much of Asia, Australia, and more. In some cases, even other variants of the MAX line are being parked, as many airlines say they won't use the plane until they have additional information about the fatal crash in Africa on Sunday and the one last fall in Indonesia. Grounded almost everywhere except in the United States, where it is still flying tonight. All of which is creating an uproar in the U.S., where a growing list of lawmakers is urging caution, if not by federal agencies, then by the airlines.
Every one of these planes should be grounded right away. They are accidents waiting to happen. I've advised my family members to switch airlines.
Still, the Federal Aviation Administration and U.S. airlines that use the MAX 8 are standing by it. The Southwest Pilots Association extremely confident in the plane, despite concerns from other aviation professionals, such as the flight attendants' unions. A software update is in the works for the aircraft, but Boeing says even now, we have full confidence in the safety of the MAX. But in Africa, as searchers scour the crash site, Ethiopian Airlines is reporting initial details from the pilot of the doomed plane that seem eerily suggestive of a software problem which some analysts believe can make these planes uncontrollable.
So he was having difficulties with the flight control of the airplane, so he asked to return back to base, and clearance was given to him.
He never made it, and that is clearly on the minds of some U.S. travelers who have found themselves somewhat alone in the world aboard Boeing MAX 8 planes.
I prayed a little bit more than usual, I think, but it was out of my hands, so I had to make it on the plane.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The insurance company IAG has admitted it's turning down more new customers in Wellington than it has in the past. The government said earlier today that IAG, which owns State, AMI and NZI, is no longer accepting new customers for contents or home insurance in the capital. Jordan Bond reports.
IAG's Executive General Manager of Consumers, Kevin Hughes, told media this afternoon it's being more strict about granting new property insurance. But he says it's not pulling out and will still consider customers in the Greater Wellington region on a case-by-case basis. Mr Hughes says IAG is focusing more on supporting existing customers rather than taking on new ones. He says it will now follow customers who move house and keep covering them, which it didn't before. This is Jordan Bond.
The government is being urged to boost funding for the aged care sector to enable rest homes to take on more staff. A report released today by the New Zealand Nurses Organisation and the ETU Union contains the results of a survey of aged care workers showing how staff shortages are affecting residents' care. An enrolled nurse at a Waikato facility, Shakesh Prakash, says at least once a shift complaints are received from patients' families concerned their relatives' needs are not being met. He has cited some examples.
My dad hasn't had a shave today, or my mom is not dressed properly, the hearing aid is not put on. Sometimes people forget to put dentures on the residents and they just offer breakfast. So this is always when you have short of staff, so you just have to rush around.
Sakesh Prakash says managers will not tell relatives the problems are caused by staff shortages, as they're afraid residents might be moved to another facility. In a Melbourne court today, George Pell has been sentenced to 6 years in prison for sexually abusing 2 choir boys in the 1990s. The 77-year-old Cardinal is the highest-ranking Catholic priest in the world to be convicted of child sex offences. The ABC's James Hancock reports.
Every seat in the courtroom was filled, with some people forced to stand against the back wall. Cardinal George Pell sat in the dock for more than an hour as Chief Judge Peter Kidd detailed his crimes. The judge started by acknowledging victims of abuse by other church figures, but said Pell would not be made a scapegoat. He described Pell's sexual attack on the 13-year-old choir boys at St Patrick's Cathedral after Sunday Mass as brazen and forceful. At the time, he was the Archbishop of Melbourne. The judge said Pell abused his powerful position and had a degree of confidence that he could get away with it. He was sentenced to 6 years jail with a non-parole period of 3 years, 8 months.
James Hancock in Melbourne. The Governor of California is imposing a moratorium on the state's death penalty, granting reprieves to all 737 inmates on death row. Gavin Newsom, who took office 2 months ago, says there will be no executions while he's in charge. He's also withdrawing the lethal injection regulations and closing the execution chamber at San Quentin State Prison, which in fact has never been used. No one has been executed in California since 2006, and most death row inmates die of old age. A government minister has expressed regret over comments interpreted to mean he'd cut off funding to a veterans' organisations if its members didn't support his party, New Zealand First. Ron Mark, who's the Minister of Veterans Affairs, says his comments were taken out of context and that was not what he meant. However, he acknowledges he could have chosen his words more carefully.
Going forward, I'm going to be a bit tighter. I tend to speak candidly with veterans, and what I was talking about there was, one, firstly, I absolutely refute that allegation. What you've seen is two comments made apart from each other, spliced together.
The Veterans Affairs Minister, Ron Mark. The entire town of Kaikoura has been told to boil water until further notice because E. coli has been found in the water. The bacteria were found at one test site at Ford's Reservoir last week, and investigations have shown there might be more in another bore. A long-awaited deluge of rain last night has allowed the Nelson City Council to ease water restrictions. Level 3 restrictions in urban areas have been lowered to Level 2, meaning some parks and sports fields can be watered for the first time in 2 weeks, and residents can again use garden hoses. The council says the water in the Maitai Dam catchment area rose by almost a metre overnight. Strict water restrictions remain for rural areas where there's not yet been enough rain to bring rivers up to the minimum flow required. The Prime Minister has told Wellington secondary school students that electric vehicles need to be cheaper. Jacinda Ardern and the Climate Change Minister James Shaw took questions about climate action at Wellington College today. Ms Ardern, who drives an electric vehicle herself, says they are still expensive and the government and businesses need to address this. She says that could include shifting business fleets into the used car market.
The more that we bring in those vehicles into the second-hand market and make it more accessible for others to be able to purchase what at the moment is technology that just isn't as accessible as it needs to be.
Jacinda Ardern. Meanwhile, a driverless car with 5G mobile technology was trialled in downtown Auckland today. Built by the New Zealand company Omio, using Spark's internal 5G network, it can be hailed from a mobile phone. Omio says the speed of 5G is necessary for autonomous cars to react and make decisions quickly enough. It's planning to launch its vehicles initially in closed environments such as airports, hospitals, university campuses and retirement homes before seeking on-road certification. It's 6:06. The Wellington wicketkeeper Tom Blundell has been called into the Black Caps test squad as cover for the injured BJ Watling ahead of the third cricket test against Bangladesh, starting in Christchurch on Saturday. Blundell, who's played only 2 previous tests, scored a century on debut against the West Indies last year. He'll join the squad in Christchurch tonight as backup for Watling, who strained his hamstring on the final day of the second test win in Wellington. A decision will be made on Friday about the availability of Watling and captain Kane Williamson, who suffered a pectoral muscle injury in that test. Defender Dylan Fox has parted ways with the Wellington Phoenix football side. The 24-year-old centre-back, who suffered a season-ending ankle injury last month, has been released by the club, which says his contract has been mutually terminated effective immediately. Fox won the Players' Player of the Year award at the end of last season, but has had little game time this year, appearing in only 6 matches. 2 young New Zealand basketballers, Dan Fotu and Quinn Clinton, have played a hand in helping their California St Mary's team topple America's top-ranked men's college team. St Mary's Soundling defeated Gonzaga University 60-47 to win the West Coast Conference title and book a place in next week's coveted NCAA tournament. The pair are both in the first year of scholarships at the university. That's the news.
Another vote. I know it's going to sound mad to actually walk through a lobby where they get counted by people like sheep. Another setback.
242, the noes to the left, 391. So the noes have it, the noes have it.
Another view. Well, it's definitely an interesting time to be British High Commissioner to New Zealand. Yet this is going to be a big week.
All the big issues. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, resilience, tourism and natural disasters. Lessons learned from Kaikoura. And after 9, the donut that could be good for us. Renegade economist Kate Rayworth on creating an economic model for everyone and the planet. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, mainly fine. Waikato to Manawatu, including central high country. Periods of rain or drizzle today, mainly south of Hamilton. Showers tomorrow, some heavy with possible thunderstorms about the central high country. For Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Fine spells and a few showers, especially in the afternoons and evenings. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington. Occasional showers or drizzle, but increasing fine spells tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, a few showers today, occasional rain developing tomorrow. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms clearing south of the glaciers by this evening and easing elsewhere overnight. For Canterbury, a southerly change this evening, bringing scattered rain. Morning drizzle tomorrow, then scattered rain returns in the evening. For Otago and Southland, a period of rain and strong southerlies today. Mainly fine tomorrow, but evening drizzle about the east coast. And the Chatham Islands, occasional rain or drizzle. It's 9.5 minutes past 6 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A man's been arrested and charged with the murder of a Kaitaia baby girl who was found dead at her home last month. Marie Takuera Mita Nahere was less than 4 weeks old and a post-mortem revealed she died of brain injuries. Our Northland reporter Lois Williams has been following the case and joins me now. Kia ora, Lois. Can you just remind us of the background to this case?
Kia ora. Lisa, Marie Ngahere, she was not quite a month old and she died on Tuesday the 19th of February. She was reportedly found by her father in the lounge room of the family's home in Kaitaia early on the Tuesday morning. It's just a small house quite close to Kaitaia Hospital there. And the post-mortem showed that she'd had a brain bleed. She died of a brain bleed and she also had very severe bruising on one thigh and on one of her arms.
Can you tell us anything about the family, her family?
Well, we do know that the parents were a young couple. They were very young, in their 20s. The mother had, I think, 2 other children. One of them had been taken into care, and one of them was taken into care after the death of Marie. They were in the house at the time, obviously. I'm not sure who else was in the house. We don't know that yet. But we do know that Oranga Tamariki had been working with the family, and certainly during this homicide inquiry.
So it has been an almost 3-week investigation, I think it is, culminating in an arrest.
Yes, it did sound at one stage as if the police weren't getting very far. They said that they were appealing for information, and they said the whānau was a bit reluctant to talk to them early on, but they did become more cooperative as the inquiry sort of dragged on. And we know that they've been checking the different accounts of what happened in the house with relatives in the north and further afield as well. And the officer leading the investigation, Lloyd Schmidt, whom I talked to last week, he told us that it had been a pretty harrowing one. It's been quite tough, he said, on some of his staff who have young children themselves. They had a photo of the wee girl up on the wall of the police station, and he said they would look at it every morning before they went off to do their interviews. He said that was quite tough on the young parents. And I have just heard this afternoon, just in the last half hour, that there was a terrible scene outside the parents' house yesterday, where the mother and the father were outside running around crazily screaming and yelling. The mother apparently gashed her arm very badly. Relatives intervened and took her away to the hospital. The police came and took the dad away, but they released him. But then they took him in today again for questioning, and now we have this arrest. The local reaction apparently has been people are really angry about this baby's death, and the whānau has been copping a lot of this anger and a lot of the blame. But there's now an arrest. This 22-year-old man has been charged with the baby's murder. He's appearing in the Kaitaia District Court tomorrow. He's also charged with assault, but that's apparently on an unrelated matter.
Thanks, Lois. That is Lois Williams, our Northern reporter there, just bringing us up to date with the death of that 4-week-old Kaikoura baby girl. A man has been charged, a 22-year-old has been charged with murder and is due to appear in court tomorrow in Kaikoura. The decision by IAG to limit its home and contents policies in Wellington isn't a surprise to the head of the Insurance Council, who says it's a natural response to the large earthquake risks in the city. People living in Wellington say they've struggled to get property insurance since last year. IAG today confirmed it had been more conservative in taking on customers since the Kaikoura earthquake and is now turning down more applicants than it accepts. It won't provide figures on the ratio of customers being rejected. The CEO of the Insurance Council, Tim Grafton, says there's not a lot of appetite for risky markets and prices are set accordingly.
We have had huge earthquakes in Canterbury. We've had a Kaikoura earthquake that had an epicentre 200 kilometres away from the city and caused well over $1 billion worth of damage in Wellington. So insurers approach these situations where they can either increase price, not accept the risk, or approach it in a different way by limiting their exposure to a risky market. And
so, Tim, should customers in Wellington expect to pay more for their insurance?
I think each individual company will make its own decisions around price for Wellington, but there is absolutely no secret about the risks here in Wellington and the insurance response to that. So there's not a lot of appetite for people to be trying to get more and more of a very risky market. And so we are seeing a situation where IAG has indicated that it's not looking for strong growth in Wellington, and other insurers may be in a different position and may want to grow some. And so we've got a market situation in play there.
Outside of risk, what else is a driver for the price of insurance?
Well, risk is it's risk and obviously reflecting that claims history. So what we've had with Canterbury earthquakes is pretty much a total economic loss of 20% of this country's GDP through those events, of which about 80+% was met by private insurers and reinsurers. So we've got an incredibly lucky situation in New Zealand where we have high levels of insurance penetration, much, much higher than other parts of the world with similar risks, like California, less than 10%, Japan, less than 20%, Canada, less than 50%. So we are very fortunate, and I think the real questions we need to be asking ourselves is, what is the level of affordability that we want to have? What level of cover do we want? Because we need to preserve that as much as we can, that high level of penetration. But ultimately, if we're thinking that living in one of the riskiest countries on Earth for earthquake, that we can rely either on the private insurers or the government to pay for everything, then we need to have a serious conversation about that, because then we would never become a resilient country, would we? We would have no incentive to reduce the risks, and that's really what we need to be focusing on, not just for earthquake, but for climate change risks and other risks that we face. So Tim, it's getting real about that.
So getting real about risks, should people move away from Wellington? Should they not live in Kaikoura? Should they not be in parts of Canterbury?
Well, there are parts of this country where you need to reflect on. I'm not just talking here about seismic risk. I'm talking about, people who do live as close as possible to the sea, where sea level is rising. Is that a good idea? No, it's not. What are we doing about that? Still currently commanding high premiums for high prices for those sorts of properties.
What percentage of this country do you think falls into those categories where they are places that the risk is too high, that they will be uninsurable in the near future?
In the near future, very, very, very small pockets around the country around climate change risks, sea level rise. You know, the difficulty of getting insurance in the likes of Haumoana, in the Hawke's Bay. There are areas of very frequent flooding in other pockets of the country, but there tend to be small, very small pockets around the place. I mean, what we've been signalling for years is that we've got to look at what lies ahead, not in the next 2 to 3 years, because that's not the issue. It's what's going to happen in the next 30 years or so that we need to be addressing, and incrementally addressing that by reducing the risks from climate change, sea level rise and the like.
How much of this do you think is related to reinsurers? Is there signals coming from underwriters overseas about the risk that New Zealand poses?
I think the risk that New Zealand poses is well signalled to the international reinsurance markets. There is a lot of capital available in the reinsurance markets.
But has there been anything specifically recently that would change IAG's thinking about Wellington or any other insurance companies' thinking?
You would need to ask IAG those questions, because I can't answer.
Generally, though, are you aware of anything?
Well, generally, as I've said, we have had an event called the Kaikoura earthquake, which caused more than $1 billion worth of damage in the city. That earthquake made total losses of buildings that well and truly met the new building standards. You know, we've been going on about this issue as well for years. We have building standards here that are totally non-compliant with respect to non-structural seismic restraints, the installation of passive fire into buildings. We have a building standard that is solely based on life safety and ignores totally total focus on life safety, which is absolutely paramount, but it's not paying sufficient attention to building resilience so the buildings are able to function, employ and house people after events.
Can you list some specific examples for us there, Tim?
Well, the defence building is a total loss. That's been knocked down off in Aitken Street. Stats House, the BNZ Centre. There was so those are 3 buildings built in the last decade that became total losses. So we take a pride, or have traditionally taken pride in the seismic construction standards. But actually, you know, if you sit back and look at it and you say, well, why did that happen? Then you've got to be asking the question, you know, what is the level of risk that actually lies beneath all of this? And so, you know, the Kaikoura event was a discovery. We've also had, and this is what insurers and reinsurers rely upon, modelling companies that model the risk. So that's the frequency and severity of risk that properties face. One such company, it's based in the United States, did a revision of the New Zealand risk. I've got to say the models for Canterbury were 100% wrong. So that event proved that the models are never right. But what importantly that remodelling has done has identified the elevated risk that exists here in Wellington.
And that is Tim Grafton of the Insurance Council. EQC has reached settlements with 6 Dunedin homeowners who were forced out of their properties before Christmas due to a landslip. It's been 3 months since the St Clair residents were told that their properties were no longer safe to occupy. But now it appears there's some light at the end of the tunnel. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has this story.
On December 13 last year, 4 homes in the Dunedin seaside suburb of St Clair were urgently evacuated after a slip was discovered following heavy rain in recent weeks. At the time, there was hope the residents could return by Christmas. But a week later, 2 more were evacuated as the full extent of the half-metre wide crack was realised. 91 days after the first homes were evacuated, the dangerous building notices remain in effect, but EQC's Head of Response and Recovery, Robin Nation, says a resolution is finally in sight for the homeowners.
They've had everything available to them that we've based their entitlement under the Act on. Individual settlement calculations have been provided to the customers and a number of the payments have been made.
EQC isn't willing to reveal how much has been paid out, but Robin Nation says settlements have been agreed with all landowners and only one has yet to be paid. The cause of the damage is a historical slow-moving slip, which has been previously identified, but the current damage was caused by the heavy rainfall in the weeks leading up to mid-December. Ms Nation says owners have been provided with conceptual solutions for fixing the problem.
Customers will now go away and look at what those solutions are for them, either individually or potentially as a group across all properties. The land is able to be remediated.
The 6 properties have a combined rateable value of $1.74 million, and EQC covers the lesser of the cost of repairing land damage, the property's value, or the value of the minimum size building allowed on the site. Checkpoint understands some homeowners have been left out of pocket as a result, but of those contacted, none wanted to discuss the matter on the record. While compensation is now forthcoming, the return home remains murky. Simon Pickford from the Dunedin City Council says the owners have been given rates relief for the rest of the financial year, and it is expected that will be rolled past July.
When this initially came to light, we were aware of obviously a crack along one of the properties on Allendale Road, but it became obviously a lot bigger than any of us had imagined, and obviously that's had a terrible impact on those poor residents who've had that thrown upon them and then not really knowing a timeline. And obviously we feel for them, but at least now I guess this milestone's been reached with EQC.
Simon Pickford says the council is confident the risk is contained to the 6 identified properties.
EQC are taking the lead, and Tonkin and Taylor have done that geotech analysis, and they've obviously identified those 6. From our point of view, our regulatory function really looks at, in addition to those 6, are there any others that we need to be concerned about? At this stage, we haven't been alerted to that, so I think we can assume that those 6 are the ones that are at immediate risk.
Other residents in the area say the slip is unlikely to affect their desire to live in the neighbourhood, but it may be months before the long-term solution is known. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
The entire town of Kaikoura has been told to boil water until further notice due to E. coli being found in the water. Last week, E. coli was found at one test site at Ford's Reservoir, and investigations have shown that there might be bacteria in another bore. This comes as the district grapples with ageing water infrastructure, some damaged by the earthquake, and a very low ratepayer base. Our South Island reporter Logan Church spoke with the Kaikoura District Council's Chief Executive, Angela Ustazen, who says three clear samples returned today have shown no presence of E. coli, but the boil water notice will remain for now.
We've done a lot of work in terms of putting remedial measures in place. So there was a perforated bladder that was of concern. We've cleaned that and we've disinfected that with chlorine. We're in the process of actually looking inside the tank. We've done an interim inspection, and tomorrow we'll be going into the tank and actually looking under the, in the water with an underwater camera. And then obviously we're reviewing what comes out of that and reviewing what actions need to be taken. And we're looking at decommissioning of the tank with the bladder, with the perforated bladder. And
why decommission that tank?
Well, it was always planned to be decommissioned as part of, the damage that was undertaken when we post the earthquake, when we did some of the initial results and assessments.
So is this earthquake damaged infrastructure?
No, it's not.
Or is it just old?
Some of the initial work at the bore was earthquake damage, and we did some initial work and we repaired that. The tank with the bladder, there are difficulties in terms of assessing how much damage there was pre and post earthquake, and so there was, after the earthquake and after the assessments, we believed it was prudent to decommission that over a period of time. And so what we're doing is we're expediting that, and then obviously the Ford Reservoir, that was always planned to be replaced, but it was going to be funded as a betterment project. It wasn't one of our immediate priorities, so we've had other water supplies like Pekata and Kincaid, where those have been higher priorities in terms of our 3-year plan.
What's the process from here in terms of the boil water notice, the mandatory boil water notice?
We're in the process of setting up a meeting with our drinking water assessor to obviously find out what is the process. I'm sure they would want to be assured that any potential risks that we've identified we've mitigated, and so I'm planning to have that discussion hopefully on Friday, and then we can get a clearer sense of what's required going forward.
So certainly that will remain in place this week then, won't it?
It will definitely remain in place this week until we're able to get the clear indication from the CPH of what's required.
And that is Angela Oosthuizen speaking to Logan Church there. In a televised address, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has told his people the recovery from power outages across the country will be little by little, adding the outage was an electronic coup carried out by criminal minds. Maduro blamed the US for attacking the power structure, but has so far offered no proof for the claim. Schools remained closed across the country amid a growing sense of chaos. And while the power outages continue, Venezuelans now face an even more dire problem, a lack of water. The BBC's Will Grant is in Caracas.
It's been another chaotic day in Venezuela's political crisis. Schools have been closed, there's been looting in other cities. And whether or not it was incompetence or sabotage that caused it, most Venezuelans are furious at President Nicolás Maduro for the vast blackout that is still affecting many public services.
First, no electricity, now no water, all in one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. After several days without power, many Venezuelans are still coping with no water supply, forcing some of the poorest to drink from the foul, polluted river that runs through Caracas. Tensions are understandably rising.
We need water. It's vital. We're human beings. They're offering us a tanker, but that'll only quench our thirst for a moment.
When the tanker finally arrives, the government official on site insists everything is fine.
This revolution keeps its word to the people. The issue with the water supply is related to the blackout, which was carried out by the opposition.
This is another sporadic protest, cutting off the main avenues of Caracas, this time not over the lack of electricity, but the lack of water. It's just another sign of a city and a country in terminal decline.
And that is the BBC's Will Grant in Caracas in Venezuela. Thank you so much for your company this evening. That's Checkpoint for the day. Whether you listened on radio or tuned in on television, if you want to stay connected, you can catch up on all our stories. They will be on the website rnz.co.nz/checkpoint, or you can check out our Facebook page for the latest news and information and features. But that's it for this evening. See you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A Northland man is appearing in the Kaikoura District Court tomorrow, charged with the murder of a baby last month. Outdoor clothing and equipment store Kathmandu is urgently investigating a suspected customer data breach at its online trading websites. The insurance company, AIG, says it's turning down more new customers in Wellington, but describes the stricter criteria as a rebalancing rather than a withdrawal from the capital. And the Prime Minister has told Wellington secondary school students that electric vehicles need to be cheaper. Our next news is at 7.
Hi, I'm Jeff Houtman, and, well, I've done a bad thing. I've been responsible, at least in part, for making the worst sitcom ever made. Very sad. Very true. We're talking about 40 excruciating episodes of expensive television mediocrity. So what went wrong? Was it really just my fault?